Welcome to week 2. I'm going to just tell you a little bit how we're going to move through the modules and through the material. In a way, I'd like to be really thorough and chronological, but it's not going to make as much sense as it would if we went through with genres. So we're going to go through looking at prose first. Prose, we've just looked at Virginia Woolf's lectures, and those are nonfiction, obviously. But now we're going to look at a bit of fiction, and fiction that was emerging at the time, and there really wasn't a concept of the novel. So the book that we'll look at, excerpts from the book that we'll look at, from Christine de Pisan, who was a late 14th century, early 15th century writer, so from about 1364 to about 1430, is written as if it were a dream vision. It's written as if it were real, but it is a fiction. And it's a fiction in the service of her ability to confront and challenge the logic of what was a common theme in medieval writing, and that was a very misogynistic one. Then I want you to watch the lectures by Marion Turner from Jesus College, Oxford, on The Wife of Bath. The Wife of Bath was written right about the same time, a little bit later than Christine de Pisan's work. The reason I have this image of Sappho up on the screen is because it's one of the earliest surviving images, portraits of her, and you can see here she's carrying a lyre because she was a poet, and this was the way that poetry was delivered with a sort of instrumental, rhythmic accompaniment. So she's an author from the BCE, before Common Era, probably around 670 BCE to 530 BCE, we don't know. She's one of the few female authors who signed her work. You remember that Virginia Woolf said, I suspect that a lot of those pieces of writing that we find that are ascribed to Anon are probably by women. And that was probably true because, very like enslaved people in this country, a lot of women who were literate felt they had to hide that literacy. And often because the content was critical of the status quo, as we've been talking about for the first 5 days of our course. So this is one of the first authors whose work still exists only in fragments. Her work was really studiously destroyed in the 13th century AD. Anyway, we also have another famous writer. This is Lady Murasaki, who wrote The Tale of the Genji in about the 11th century AD. So what I wanted to talk to you about in this particular video, and it does come up in our quiz, is the idea of who wrote the Book of Love. And I'm going to take you to an early 19th century novel. This is the last novel written by Jane Austen, Persuasion. Many of you mentioned it. And this is one of the last chapters. The whole company is in Bath. And if you remember, Persuasion is about Anne Elliot, who, when she was just a young woman of 18, was the subject of a proposal from a young sailor named Frederick Wentworth. And she was persuaded, despite her esteem and affection for this sailor, to give him up. Lady Russell, a character who is a mother figure to her, said, he has no money, he has no prospects, you can't ally your future with him. You might end up impoverished. And as I mentioned last week, remember Lydia, who is the youngest sister in Pride and Prejudice, gets her own husband. She runs off with the very handsome young Captain Wickham. But Wickham has no prospects, and as I mentioned in my reply to one of your posts, they end up broke before the end of the honeymoon. So Lady Russell was doing what she thought was best. She was doing something that would protect the financial security of Anne Elliot, who is her favorite of the Elliot children. At the same time, she is betraying prejudice against a mere sailor. And that's an important thing for us to recognize, that Jane Austen is looking at prejudices as well as financial scruples and where the two overlap. So let's just have a quick look at this. This is when Captain Harville has been given a commission by his would-be brother-in-law, Captain Benwick, who had been intended to marry Fanny Harville, that is the younger sister of Captain Harville, but she died. So let's have a look at what Captain Harville has to say to Anne when he's talking about this commission that he's been given, because we're going to come along with the idea of who wrote the Book of Love. All right? So this is Captain Harville. He's opening up a little package that he has with the miniature that had been painted of Captain Benwick formerly intending to marry his sister who died. "Look here," said he, unfolding the parcel in his hand and displaying a small miniature painting. "Do you know who that is?" "Certainly." This is Anne speaking. "Certainly, Captain Benwick." "Yes, and you may guess who it is for. And it is for Louisa Musgrove, who has, you remember, been injured at the very beginning of the book and has been taken care of by the Harvilles. And that is where Captain Benwick has fallen in love with her, only a few months after Fanny Harville has died. Yes, and you may guess who it is for, but," in a deep tone, "it was not done for her, Miss Elliot. Do you remember our walking together at Lyme and grieving for him? I little thought then, but no matter. This was drawn at the Cape. He met with a very clever young German artist at the Cape, and in compliance with a promise to my poor sister, sat to him, and was bringing it home for her, and I have now the charge of getting it properly set for another. It was a commission to me. But who else was there to employ? I hope I can allow for him. I am not sorry, indeed, to make it over to another. He undertakes it," looking towards Captain Wentworth. "He is writing about it now." And with a quivering lip he wound up the whole by adding, "Poor Fanny, she would not have forgotten him so soon." "No," replied Anne in a low, feeling voice, "that I can easily believe. It was not in her nature. She doted on him." And Anne says, "It would not be in the nature of any woman who truly loved." Captain Harville smiled, as much as to say, "Do you claim that for your sex?" And she answered the question, smiling also, "Yes, we certainly do not forget you as soon as you forget us. It is perhaps our fate rather than our merit. We cannot help ourselves. We live at home, quiet, confined, and our feelings prey upon us. You are forced on exertion. You have always a profession, pursuits, business of some sort or other, to take you back into the world immediately, and continual occupation and change soon weaken impressions. Granting your assertion that the world does all this so soon for men, which, however, I do not think I shall grant, it does not apply to Benwick. He has not been forced upon any exertion. The peace turned him on shore at the very moment, and he has been living with us in our little family circle ever since." "True," said Anne, "very true. I did not recollect. But what shall we say now, Captain Harville? If the change be not from outward circumstances, it must be from within. It must be nature, man's nature, which has done the business for Captain Benwick." "No, no, it is not man's nature. I will not allow it to be more man's nature than woman's to be inconstant and forget those they love or have loved. I believe the reverse. I believe in a true analogy between our bodily frames and our mental, and that as our bodies are the strongest, so are our feelings, capable of bearing most rough usage and riding out the heaviest weather." And then he says a little bit later, "Well, Miss Elliot," lowering his voice, "as I was saying, we shall never agree, I suppose, upon this point. No man and woman would, probably. But let us observe that all histories are against you, all stories, prose, and verse. If I had such a memory as Benwick, I could bring you 50 quotations in a moment on my side of the argument, and I do not think I ever opened a book in my life which had not something to say upon woman's inconstancy. Songs and proverbs all talk of woman's fickleness, but perhaps you will say these were all written by men." "Perhaps I shall. Yes, if you please, no reference to examples in books. Men have had every advantage of us in telling their own story. Education has been theirs in so much higher a degree. The pen has been in their hands. I will not allow books to prove anything." And we're going to hear something similar in the prologue to The Wife of Bath's Tale. When you're listening to Dr. Turner's lectures, she'll talk about this question posed by the lion in a particular encounter with a knight, in which the lion asks, "Who painted the lion?" And then we're going to come across a very similar question about the dejected Meta Christine, who puts her head down on the table after reading a section of The Romance of the Rose, which was very misogynistic and very critical of women and their inconstancy. and asks why she was so unfortunate to have been born a woman. And then Lady Reason comes along and asks her why she's reading that trash and says, "Who do you think wrote it?" So look forward to those two texts in this week's work. I hope you'll take the opportunity to read Persuasion if you haven't. All of Jane Austen's works are freely available online because they're out of copyright through Project Gutenberg.